A stone hall, torch smoke, roasting meat. People tear duck apart with their hands, grease drips down fingers, a wine goblet goes around the room. You're hungry, you reach for the best piece, grab it with your hand and wipe your fingers on the tablecloth. For a second, the hall goes quiet. Today, that's just bad manners. But in the Middle Ages, it could cost you your status, your career, and sometimes access to the court. Because back then, manners weren't just politeness, they were a password. A language that instantly told you who's the lord, who's the outsider, and who should never sit at this table. And the strangest part? Many rules were made so that ordinary people couldn't easily master them. Manners weren't just culture, they were a tool of power, and it all started with food. Three-finger eating, the aristocratic test. An early medieval feast looked strange by modern standards. There were almost no plates. Meat was placed on a thick slice of bread, a trencher. It soaked up the fat and sauce. After the feast, that bread was usually given to servants or the poor. People ate with their hands. Most had a knife to cut the meat and bring it to their mouth. A spoon was often a personal item. You carried it with you, sometimes tucked right into your belt. If you showed up to a feast without your own spoon, it immediately marked you as an outsider. But even in this apparent chaos, there were strict rules. No grabbing the best piece, no chewing with your mouth open, no blowing your nose on the tablecloth, and above all, you had to control your hands. Some medieval books of manners advised eating with only 3 fingers, thumb, index, and middle. Try carving a greasy duck with 3 fingers without staining your pinky. It's really not easy. But that's how an aristocrat showed the main quality of his class: absolute self-control. In the 13th century, the first books of manners appeared. They explained everything: how to sit, how to take bread, how to speak at the table, but their real function went deeper. They created a social test. A nobleman had to stand out from a peasant, even when both were eating the same meat. Yet food was only the beginning. Sometimes the meal itself drew an even harsher line between people. Cleanliness rituals, pitchers and hounds. Napkins as we know them hardly existed, but that doesn't mean people just sat around with dirty hands. On the contrary, castles had a whole, elaborate ritual for cleanliness. Before the feast, servants brought pitchers of water and large copper bowls. Guests washed their hands one by one, while a page stood nearby with a long linen towel over his shoulder. His job was simple: offer the fine linen cloth so the distinguished guest could dry their greasy fingers. Pages were often not ordinary servants. They were boys from noble families, sent to learn courtly life. They watched the knights, learned manners, and served at the table, handing out towels, water, and dishes. But even after washing, the feast quickly turned into a chaotic sight. Meat cut with knives, sauces dripping down fingers, grease gathering on the table, and under the tables, there was always another part of the medieval cleaning system: dogs. Hunting hounds lay right under the feet of the diners. Bones, scraps of meat, and gnawed leftovers constantly fell and vanished instantly into the dogs' mouths. Etiquette even warned, don't play with the dogs while eating, and don't feed them directly from the table. If a rule has to be written down in a book of manners, it usually means one thing: people were doing it all the time. Under the table, a whole other life went on. While upstairs aristocrats discussed politics and refinement, down below, dogs quietly played the role of the Middle Ages' most efficient cleaning crew. But even this loud, greasy atmosphere didn't change the main point. A true lord had to look as if everything around him was happening on its own. He doesn't rush, he doesn't get dirty, he makes no sharp moves, and it was precisely these little things that instantly told those around him, this is a nobleman or someone who's only trying to look like one. Shoe-length wars, status on your feet. Picture a street in a medieval town, a peasant in coarse wool, a merchant in fine cloth, a nobleman in silk and fur. This isn't just fashion, it's the law, a visual code of your place in the world. In the 13th and 14th centuries, so-called sumptuary laws appeared all over Europe. They determined who had the right to look wealthy, who could wear fur, who could wear silk, who could wear gold. Even shoes could be political. The fashion was poulaines, shoes with long pointed toes. Sometimes those toes reached 30 or even 40 centimeters, and the longer the toe, the higher the owner's status. But cities set limits. For knights, a long toe; for townspeople, shorter; for peasants, none at all. A rigid visual hierarchy. Medieval society believed the social order was divine. God separated people into classes, and clothing had to show that. But there was a problem. Clothes could be bought, a wealthy merchant could afford fur and silk, and that raised an uncomfortable question. What if he's mistaken for a noble? To prevent that, the elite started using another way to tell people apart. One you couldn't just buy, it was manners. But even knowing the rules, you could give yourself away with just one small detail. Refined spitting, the etiquette of dirt. Medieval books of manners contain advice that sounds almost absurd today. For example, if you need to spit, don't do it on the table. Better to spit under the table and carefully rub it in with your foot. That was considered a sign of good upbringing, but at the same time, noble manners required incredible self-control. You had to watch your hands, your posture, your voice, even how you chew. The peasant world lived by different rules. For peasants, the table was almost a sacred place. On it lay bread, the symbol of life. So at the table, no arguing, no sitting on it, no endless chatter. Sometimes talkative people got a spoon to the forehead. Food was too important to waste on empty talk. It was a matter of survival and respect. The aristocracy had another way to spot an outsider, the body. Noble children spent years learning manners. Boys were sent as pages to other lords. There they learned more than the sword. They learned how to carry themselves, how to stand, bow, hold a cup, enter a room, and even how to laugh. Behavior became part of your status. Even if a peasant put on expensive clothes, his movements would almost instantly give him away. Manners turned into a kind of social accent. But then, something unexpected happened. People outside the palaces started learning these rules. Buying class. How merchants copied lords. By the 14th and 15th centuries, Europe begins to change. Cities grow, trade expands, merchants get rich, a new social group appears, educated townspeople, and they start reading books on manners. Future officials, university students, merchants, all of them study the rules of conduct. They learn to sit like nobles, speak like nobles, eat like nobles. For the first time, manners become a social elevator. Sometimes you could change your fate simply by knowing how to hold a cup correctly, when to bow, and how to make conversation. That's why in the 15th century, books on manners became incredibly popular. But the aristocracy quickly noticed the danger. If anyone can learn the rules, how do you tell a real lord? The answer was simple: make the rules even harder. Court etiquette gradually turns into a system of elaborate ceremonies. Who serves the water? Who holds the candle? Who gets to sit closer to the host? Who speaks first? Manners become a barrier again, but now an almost invisible one. Social suicide, the cost of a mistake. Imagine a royal palace hall. You're talking to a nobleman. You laugh. Everything is going well, and then you make one small mistake. You sit down before the high person who ranks above you. The room suddenly goes quiet. Because in court culture, there was an unspoken rule. Every movement shows the hierarchy. Who speaks first? Who sits first? Who offers a hand? Who walks through the door first? A cold dance of power. Even the distance between people could matter. To make a mistake meant admitting you are beneath the other person, or worse, publicly insulting someone above you. Sometimes careers ended over such small things. One awkward gesture could cost you a patron, your place at court, and all your political future. That's why nobles trained like actors. They controlled their walk, the speed of their bow, the position of their hands, their facial expression, even how long they held a gaze. Court life slowly became a constant exam. Every day, every gesture, every step. And one day, one European king would turn this system into the ultimate weapon of power. The king's puppet, the ultimate machine. Later, one European king would perfect this system. In the palace, everything would be planned down to the smallest detail. Who hands the king his shirt? Who holds the candlestick? Who has the right to stand by his bed? Nobles would compete not over lands or armies. They would compete for the right to hand the king his water. From the outside, it looks like a strange theater of the absurd, but in reality, it's an ideal machine of control, because while the nobility competes for a place by the royal bed, the level of intrigue never rises above that bed, and the king quietly runs the country. Manners began as rules at the table, but in the end, they became one of the most refined tools of power in European history. And the strangest thing? This system never disappeared. It just got quieter. Today, we don't call it social hierarchy. We call it simple good upbringing. What do you think? Do people still determine each other's status today? By what rules? Write it in the comments and subscribe to the channel. There are many more interesting details of history ahead.